Business, the first thing I want to get to is this is Keith. He is our presenter for today. He already introduced himself. And Keith, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy day to come and join us and give a presentation on this topic. It's a really important topic. And I think it's one that's not talked about often enough. So I'm really glad that you are here and this is part of our speaker series this year. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, so again, I was asked to do the risk presentation today, and I kind of wrote it to the point of parents, but kind of like a global too. So we'll see how that plays out. So I basically said, thank you for, most of all, thank you for time and pursuit, making difference in the lives of children every day. It's done by giving of yourself to make a positive difference in the lives of each child. And we look at that as if you're in the education world, you did that to make a difference. Obviously, you didn't go in to get rich. As a parent, you are a parent, and obviously every day, 24/7, you're living the experience of how to deal with children and the idiosyncrasies of how to raise a child. And then basically, I just put the little caption here saying, education is for improving the lives of others and for leaving your community and the world better than when you first found it. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to provide a quick overview about dealing with behaviors, and kind of forms the premise of why we at Risk, why we do what we do. First of all, it's regulatory, but the other thing having to do with that is our focal point. You'll see since Carol, when I first came on board, Risk was designed to basically as a repository of restraints, keeping track of those as you're supposed to, and then running a report to the Secretary of Ed. Carol and probably pre-Carol and Amy though, but still more focal point now, their position is positive behavior support. What interventions, what are things that are happening? How are you writing the IP to understanding the function of the behavior, all those different things to basically decrease restraints. They'll provide a quick overview of that. And I'll provide a clear understanding of the restraint information system collection. I don't know why that's redundant there, but okay. And then provide the audience an overview of the restraints of what we see. Provide the learner supporting regulatory requirements and guidelines pertaining to the risk. Share how BSE uses the risk site and our current goals of the risk team as we move forward. So this is pretty much, I did this for the parents, but again, you know, the United States Department of Education gives edicts of different things, laws and regulations that have to come down via IDEA, via the Office of Civil Rights, the Office of Special Education, who then impact on sharing that with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania then modifies theirs a little bit to meet the SEA's regard, meet their requirements as a state education agency. Most of our Chapter 14 is pretty much copyright out of the IDA regulations for the most part, except for where it's afforded more protection under different court cases we have in Pennsylvania. Then you have where I don't have it is you have the patent and the IUs providing supports to the LEAs, the information and channeling of what's going on with that. And then obviously the LEA agencies, then the representation of your public school districts, your charter schools, and your cyber charter schools under those regulations. Why do we do the restraint system? And obviously right there, Chapter 14 and Chapter 711. I was asked to do a charter school, I think it's next week, a presentation in Philadelphia charter schools. So school entities shall maintain and report data on the use of restraints as prescribed by the Secretary. The report shall be reviewed during cyclical compliance monitoring conducted by the department. So you have a twofold thing. We do a collection of all the restraints. We read all the restraints that are put into the system. We vet those. We see different things, and I'll share that later on about how we do that. Then we take that information and we develop a report for the Secretary of Education to review every year. And I'm sure that he does. He'll look at the total amount of restraints and all the different subcategories of that, some of it even down to the point of what different people restrained, how many people were trained, the issue of how many were IEPs, how many were waivers, all those different subcategories that we report out to the Secretary to compare data from one year to the next. In addition to that, we use the restraint program for your individual Bureau of Special Education advisors or SPOC as we call them, when they go out to cyclical monitoring and do the behavior part of the behavior support part of the cyclical monitoring. And what they'll do is they'll go and see which people have been, there's like 10 files of pulled of somebody who's been restrained, and if the process was followed correctly. We might delve in some of the processes that we look at in the restraint system. So we provide that information to the Bureau of Special Education advisors. Right now, we're working on a system within the RISC system to be able to provide out there a 6-year document that will show the total amount of restraints each year and the waivers, and it'll show if there were any that were law enforcement involvement. Just a myriad of like 5 or 6 different things that will show that when the Bureau of Special Education advisor looks at that, they get a pretty good picture from 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 4, 3, 2, so they can see what's framing out within those restraints for that district. We'll probably also turn that over to where we'll also have the LEA be able to look at that as well, so that they have an ongoing button that you can push and get a real quick snapshot of what the last 5, 6 years were within a restraint system. And the purpose of that is this: we want districts to be cognizantly aware of students within their jurisdiction, of how well they're doing with the positive behavior support within their program. But not only that, but how well are they monitoring the students that are outside the district going to approved private schools or licensed private academic schools, whatever, under the framework of restraints, see if in fact these things are decreasing. So when we look at it, we also encourage positive behavior support, positive behavior interventions and supports. We push that. We say, okay, within the framework of the whole district, does the district have a philosophical belief that we're going to try to find ways to intervene with the child that's having a bad day or circumstances to try to find out the function of that child's behavior at that time, or for that matter, continued behaviors, and how we can basically provide interventions, trainings, either trainings to staff to where they can look at de-escalation techniques, or if in fact you can teach the student some skills, some social skills too, to where you would decrease that, so where they can handle their behaviors, their structure, their anger, or whatever the situation might be causing those outbursts to occur. So that's district-wide. Philosophically, that we're looking at how are we going to be able to help the district develop that philosophical belief. That could be even touching base with the cooks, the bus drivers, the custodians, working with the parents, all that culture. Then from that point, the school building, each school building is unique within their own developmental needs, from an elementary to middle school to high school. How are you looking at that to interface those different behavior interventions for those kiddos for those age? And for that matter, staff training, because every staff is different. Every staff is unique in regards to how they make up the framework within their building. Then you look at classroom-wide. Some teachers are better than other teachers in recognizing behavior. Some are just very spontaneous. You do that very effortlessly, and some it's very rigid for them, and they might need more supports. And then it finally goes down to the individual child, a positive behavior support plan. Does the child need a positive behavior support tailored to him or her to provide some supports to where they have more success in school, and they don't have those outbursts to the point where they have to, is a danger to them or others, to where there has to be an intervention process. And we're looking at, again, not only school, but how's the LEA working with the family structure too, of what's happening. And it could be something that's systemic over time, or it could be something chronic occurring right, at the very moment. So looking at all those things and trying to find the key to all that is the first thing to ask when you see a behavior is, how do I get this kid out of my room? No, it's, what's the function of that behavior? Why is this occurring? Try to dig deep and try to teach your staff to get to that point. When I was a special ed director, I worked real hard with that, especially when I brought the emotional support kiddos that were in a IU classroom or IU-based program back to our school system and build the ES program in the elementary, middle school, and high school program. That was a challenge to get people to readily recognize the function of the behavior versus I've got to teach this curriculum. I've got to get this done. I've got to get it. And you can do them both in tandem. But Some people say, well, I'm hired to do this, I'm not hired to do this. And the thing is, we're hired to teach kids. We try to make it the best way we can, and recognizing behaviors occur for different reasons. What are those functions? So in a perfect world, if we understood the function of the student's behavior, there's a good chance we could minimize it from occurring again. Keep in mind, behavior is communication for information to inform ways to teach rather than to punish. And I always said, as I said, always ask, what is the function of? Remember, past learned behaviors that you might be working with, having to teach the student certain skills that they may not have, they might have a skill deficit in that, or just a matter that they're struggling with their behaviors and they might need some supports in many different ways, recognizing that sometimes it takes time to change that behavior because it took time for that behavior to evolve to where it is now. So that's my little catch there with the understanding behavior. So what is a restraint? The application of physical force with or without the use of any device for the purpose of restraining the free movement of a student or eligible young child's body. The application of physical force with or without the use of any device for the purpose of restraining the free movement of the student's or eligible young child's body. So again, I have a lot of questions with that. The ukaru, bouncing and everything like that, that you're trying to get the kiddo from hitting you with mats or pads. Again, that's not a restraint. But if you push him against the wall and you hold him and bat him against the wall where he can't move, now that is a restraint. So follow the definition of that. I thought I'd use that as an example because it's the same patting intervention, but used for different reasons. The term does not include briefly holding without force a student or eligible young child to calm or comfort him, guiding a student or eligible young child to an appropriate activity, or holding a student or eligible young child's hand to safely escort him from one area to the other. Again, these are wordings, verbiages coming out of Chapter 14 or Chapter 711. Chapter 711 is charter schools, Chapter 14 for public school. So again, regulations dictate exactly what the restraint is or is not. Does not include hand-over-hand assistance with feeding or task completion or techniques prescribed by a qualified medical professional for reasons of safety or for the therapeutic or medical treatment as agreed by the student or eligible young child's parent and specified in the IP. Devices used for physical or occupational therapy, seat belts in wheelchairs or on toilets used for balance and safety, safety harnesses in buses, and functional positioning devices are examples of mechanical restraints which are excluded from the definition of and governed by subsection D. So it's interesting to note that a medical PT can't just say, okay, we're going to use this harness for this, or we're going to use this for that. There's a point there where you see here is that it's prescribed by a qualified medical professional for reasons of safety. So a PT and a OT has to follow pretty much medical professional guidance to that, what they provide for that child. But they are not restraints. Mechanical restraints which are used to control involuntary movement or lack of muscle controls for students when due to organic causes or condition may be employed only when specified by the IP and is determined by the medical professional qualified to make that determination. I just shared that. When a student is handcuffed, it is considered a restraint. The Bureau of Special Education will investigate any school-age student who has an IP and was handcuffed or tased. I just gave you this and parents or whoever it is just maybe the bookmark. Again, what I just read from was from those right there, 14133 and 71146. There's also a safe schools one I'm going to touch base with later. Safe schools having to do with police officers. So the other thing that you know, since most of you guys know about this, is the pen link. Many parents don't understand the pen link. We do a very outreaching program within the RISC system that we send out quarterly pen link reminders. So quarterly, 4 times a year, to the LEAs, charter schools, cyber charter schools, and public schools. This information about when they should be reporting for different quarters for the restraint. We also provide a window where you see the 0 window open, 0 window closes. So not only do we want them to report restraints, we want them also to report if they did not have any restraints. Our goal is to get 500 LEAs, or 500 public schools, and 186 charter schools, cyber charter schools to report in this every quarter. Our minimum goal, so you know, that we really aspire, that we expect, is that they at least report 1 quarter per year. And most of them do report 4 quarters. There are some that we struggle with, and we keep track of that. If a district chooses not to report for the whole year, they will get a letter from me, basically, from Carol, that will go to the superintendent or the CEO, explaining to them that they have to now submit a letter of assurance that they will fulfill that obligation from here moving forward of those 4 quarters. And then we monitor that. Here's the hyperlink, the pen link that we have for RISC. So local education agencies are responsible, again, I'm focusing more for parents, but for reporting restraints that have occurred on any of their students being serviced through IPs who have been restrained within their buildings, within IU classes, within classes outside the district, such as approved private schools, licensed private academic schools, and even in residential systems, the host district of that residential system needs to submit that information into the RISC program. RISC is a reporting system. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I ask a quick question? So each school district, each LEA reports on their student, even if it was like like you said, approved private school, say it was at the local Catholic school, but so does the Catholic school report it and the district?
When you say Catholic, is Catholic, when I talk about approved private schools, they're certified APS, is you're talking non-pub, what you're talking about Catholic, aren't you?
Right.
If it's a Catholic school, they are not obligated to report because they are non-public schools.
Okay.
Yeah. Approved private schools would be like your Devereaux, those
Right.
type of systems.
New story. Okay.
Yeah. So Regina, if I can just jump in, because remember, Catholic and private parochial schools don't have IEPs.
Right.
So Clevely and Heights, while they are based in the Catholic faith, they are a school that we as a district would place students at. So if
Right.
they have a restraint, that gets reported to the district and we enter that in the RISC system.
Okay.
But
Okay.
if it's a student who's attending Greensburg Central Catholic, they don't have an IEP, so there's nothing to report.
Right. Okay.
Yep. RISC is basically designed for any school-age student who has an IEP. Not even a 504, just IEPs. So again, it is a reporting data system monitored by us. It is a monitored system of all restraints which occur to school-age students within the LEA systems. That's the charters and your cyber charters in your public schools. It is one of the tools used within special education audits under positive behavior support to determine if LEAs are complying with special education guidelines and regulations. And it's a system used to provide an annual report to the Secretary of Education. And this is our guidelines. Within our guidelines booklet that we have, if you go into, I don't know if I have it in this slide here, but if you go into log in onto the RISC site, the login page for anybody to view, there are six areas there, but there are like 4 documents. One document has to do with a webinar which we're updating right now. It's a 2016 one. We're in the process of doing a new PowerPoint presentation. That'll be probably by the end of 2022 that we'll have that up and running for that site. And explains, it's for the LEAs to really review it, and talks about who we are, how to report restraints, what's called the R3 system. I think I'll get into that today, the restraint review request system, and how that process all works from the beginning to the end. It's probably an hour and 15-minute, 20-minute presentation that they can look at as a webinar to teach new people coming on board. It also has a Department of Education document. They're talking about restraints, exclusions, seclusion, those type of things. One of those documents, I think it's a 2019 document. And so it has those different things, and also has what's called a guidelines. And we're working on that now too, is the guidelines under the risk system. We want to make it look a little bit more professional. That'll be out there, the guidelines for anybody to review why we do what we're doing. Similar to what I'm saying here with the positive behavior support and how what our goals are to do with decreasing restraints across the Commonwealth. So anyway, this is where you see this document, this information, which says for students whose behaviors impede his or her learning or the learning of others, IEP teams must consider strategies and supports, including positive behavior interventions to address that behaviors. Restraints are a measure of the last resort. We read a restraint. We see something in there in regards to the antecedent behavior and the behavior that they're supposed to put in there, and then the interventions that they did. And if we see things in there that we don't think it comes to that level of being the last resort, we will contact that district and ask them, and we'll send an advisor in to ask about the circumstance of that. And if that narrative's correct, then we'll recognize that maybe they need more training in regards to those de-escalation techniques, that they went too quick to the restraint system. So anyway, the last resort may be only used when less restrictive measures, including de-escalation techniques, have been used by personnel working in the educational program. The use of physical restraints is limited to controlling acute or episodic aggressive or self-injurious behaviors when the student is acting in a manner that is clear and present danger to himself, to other students, and only when less restrictive measures and techniques have proven to be or are less effective. Okay, so again, here's the restraints used in IEPs. Use of restraints may be included in the student's eligible IEP when the following applies. And it basically says, so if you have it in, the restraint is utilized with specific components, elements of positive behavior support, always positive to start with. The restraint is used in conjunction with teaching the socially acceptable behaviors, like I said before, acceptable alternative skills to replace problem behaviors. They are authorized to use the procedure and have received staff training in this area. And there you have it. There's a plan in place for eliminating the use of restraints with the application of positive behavior support. Okay. Law enforcement involvement. More and more we're finding that school resource officers, community police officers, state police are getting more and more involved in school systems. And within that systems, they're called in sometimes to deal with the behaviors, sometimes more than we would like to see. Some LEAs are looking at utilizing that as a way to control those kiddos' behaviors versus managing the behaviors by bringing somebody in. So what we're trying to do, and it's interesting to know, because I was just reading something about in Maine where the Office of Civil Rights of the federal government went in and said that police officers should not be the first point of dealing with the behavior unless it's really chronic, where, you know, like obviously guns and things like that, that there should be a system in place first and try those different interventions that are less restrictive till you bring in somebody along. But again, under our safe schools, it says that the principal directs the police what to do. But again, when there's law enforcement involved, this is chapter 14. Subsequent to a referral, so after a referral to law enforcement, the student with a disability who has a positive behavior support plan, so an updated functional behavior assessment and positive behavior support plan shall be required. So if a police system is brought in and they're part of being, if they come in and not for the restraint part of it, but if they handcuff the child, that's what we're considering a referral to law enforcement. If they are handcuffed, then there needs to be a functional behavior assessment and positive behavior support plan should be required. So if there is law enforcement involved, all those three that I mentioned involved in restraint causing a student to be handcuffed or tased, or the third option is, which we're looking at under safe schools, is charged under safe school violations. Now, there are two different systems within safe schools. This is something that you may or may not know. There's discretionary and mandatory. If a child brings a real gun in the school, mandatory charge. If a child brings a toy gun in the school, discretionary, depending on their policies. So there's certain things that are really etched in the safe schools, say this is a mandatory thing you have to report. But then there are other ones that are discretionary. And if they are public disorder or something, to where there's something where the kid is really out of control, charges are brought under that, as it could be either or depending on how it falls on that. But if they report it, if it's reported in safe schools, they have to check that box. We go in and then again evaluate or investigate. What we do is we don't investigate what the police officer did, because safe school says they have complete jurisdiction when they make decisions, because they have to make second decisions. We go in and say, if the child had interventions prior to that, de-escalation techniques or circumstances along that line, would that have curtailed that from happening where they were handcuffed or being charged? And if so, then we would then direct the district to do more training in that area. So this is the safe schools things, which is really interesting too. It basically talks about if a student with positive behavior support plan, upon notification to a local department that a student with disability has committed an incident under, and then you have the 1303A, the mandatory versus the discretionary, that either way, that if there is a charge brought up against them, that the student who with a disability who does not have a positive behavior support plan, upon notification to a local police department, that a student with a disability committing the incident, that the school entity shall convene the student's IEP meeting, and then they shall also consider whether a positive behavior support plan should be developed to address the student's behavior. So it kind of parlays right into with the 14, the chapter 14, chapter 7 and 11 guidelines. So they kind of intersperse or put those together within framework of the Safe Schools, Chapter 10. Again, I gave you this the guideline websites as well as positive behavior support. Another thing I wanted to share, and this is something I threw more, and I'm doing a charter school thing, but person to person in regards to a hybrid model that recognize and remember, just recognize and remember that even if you're doing a virtual system out there, still, some people might be, that there's still kids struggling, and they may need some work with parents and primary caregivers to work with some of the behaviors and developing a behavior system within that virtual platform to be able to, when they get back to face-to-face, that they can maybe transition easier with some of those behaviors that might be occurring at home. And I say that because I watched my son, who's he's at COP now, but before then, he was working with an IU program and as a PT, and it was interesting watching him work with the preschool kiddos virtually, trying to be very creative and getting them really involved. And some of them were behavior kids that were really tough to work with, and he was really creative with getting them to listen online and doing some creative things. So again, this goes back that we have 29 local 29 IUs across the Commonwealth. Each one of them are assigned a SPOC. Except for Philadelphia has 10 networks with probably about 7 SPOCs assigned, Bureau of Special Education Advisors assigned to do the cyclical monitoring. And obviously within the cyclical monitoring, they also deal with, they work with us under the RISC to go out and help with any investigations that occur. When do we basically investigate? And what I mean by investigate is that we will contact, either ourselves will contact the LEA, or we'll have the Bureau of Special Education Advisor of that assigned IU region reach out to them about those, and also send out a thing that's called an R3, a restraint review request, which explicitly shares what we're seeing there within that restraint or restraints and what we're investigating. It could be, and this happens often, is we say a staff that's not trained. If staff is not trained, we're reaching out to the LEA and saying, hey, you know, this person wasn't trained with this restraint. We know there are certain outlying reasons why that might happen when a student takes off on a playground and heading out to a road, and the teacher, regular teacher, or any teacher, or somebody grabs the child before and holds the child down and drags them back, and it's considered a restraint, that those circumstances are going to happen. But then we say, does that person need to be trained? And so, and there are other times when the staff is trained, but they don't check on the box that's student trained, or the teacher's not trained, then it's just an error. So there's different reasons. One is because mechanical. Anytime there's a handcuff or tase, we're going to be out there, or if there's a charge under Safe Schools. A restraint of a special education student involved in, that was the Safe Schools charge. Excessive restraints longer than 60 minutes. If we see and that if you've ever, I used to be in a center-based system as a head teacher. And to hold a student for 60 minutes is, first of all, it's very, very hard. But the other thing is it's too excessive. And we're going to come out and see again, what is their system? What are they doing? We'll send out a Bureau of Special Education advisor, check that out. Multiple injuries occurring with students and our staff. We had a center-based system that we went in and touched base with the IU because it was an IU-based center. We were seeing a lot of injuries with both staff and students, and we went in there and did an investigation. I sat down with everyone and talked about where to move forward on. Patterns of excessive holds of a specific student or holds that have not decreased over time. I had shared that earlier. Excessive law enforcement involvement and restraints with staff not involved. High waiver count without reconvening an IP. We saw that last year, that we started watching that you might have 30 restraints and parents waived in writing 30 times that they didn't want to have an IP. And the problem with that is, as I said before, if there are restraints in the IP and there's supposed to be an elimination plan, how can you know it's working unless you convene the IP and talk about where are we and where do we need to go? Serious injury and warning and investigation. If you have an arm breakage or something, concussion, staff not trained. So those are some of the reasons we will go out. Already read about that. So again, like an R3 is the tool that we use. It's a document that explains the circumstances, the regulatory issues that support that issue and concern, and asking and questions to ask the advisors, to ask the LEAs why this is occurring, to come up with an understanding. If in fact it is something that is an error, that the LEA is not doing what they need to do, or have missed that, or somebody's not trained, or circumstances, any of those things, the advisor will guide them to develop a resolution plan. The resolution plan might be that we'll be training these individuals this time, get signatures that they were trained, and we will submit back to you that they were trained. And that's a resolution to that person or persons that need to be trained. So it depends on every circumstance. So when the advisor receives an R3, they receive a copy of the restraint of the incidents that are coordinated with that actual R3. This provides them the most of the information they need for the investigation. Then they contact the LEA to get more clarity. Investigate, and they ask questions pertaining to concerns per the IP, and then fill out the IP as completely as possible. Once completing the investigation, advisor sends back to us that information. We do that all now electronically. So for instance, if we see in the filling out of this document here, that they check that there was a handcuff, we basically automatically sends out this R3. So when you go into the restraint system, it asks you to do a couple things. It asks you to do antecedent behaviors, the student's information first, the actual incident occurred, and the IP information if they reconvene it. If we find anything that's out of sorts with that, it'll kick out an R3 to the advisor and to us. We take it from there. I know I'm talking fast. Any questions? So the R3 process works just like that, is that if a LEA puts in to the restraint systems and reports that there was a handcuff situation, as soon as they click on handcuff, that puts an electronic system to us that says there's an R3 coming your way. We look at it, we look at the restraint, we look at the R3, how it's pre-populated the information. We assign it to, we drag down to the advisor, assign it to the advisor, so that RFD then kicks over to the advisor. The advisor reads it, makes contact right there with the LA, hopefully by phone first, because if it was an error reporting, then they just basically say error and it's done. But if it wasn't an error reporting, then they push a button over to the LEA. The LEA reads it and says, okay, and they talk about what are we going to do with this? And they have to decide if, in fact, could there be more training so that police officers will not be involved? Do we need to provide more skill training for the student? Do we need to convene the Obviously, if there's a handcuff, we should have reconvened the IP to discuss further about if there's any need for supplemental aids and supports, and go that route. So that's how the R3 process works. When they're done with that, they fill it out, send it back to us electronically. If there's any files that they need to attach to it of what they've done, they do a PDF format that they kick back to us. We look at it and it goes on file. Question?
Is there any procedures that the districts or schools have to follow as far as like injuries and restraint? Like if, you know, is a kid like evaluated for injuries after restraint or anything like
so
that?
there's a place not only to fill out, again, that part that they fill out this when they do the report, the restraint report into the risk system. One of the things says, was there an injury? And it has a student section and a staff section. So it says, was there an injury? Yes or no? And you put yes. At the end of the document, it opens up a page that says an injury page, and it says staff or student. And it could be staff, or it could be student, or it could be both. Then they have to fill it out of what the injury was. If it's a serious medical injury, that's one that we qualify as that they have to receive services outside the school, like outside from the nurse looking at them, maybe have to go and see a doctor or an emergency room or something. Then that comes out to us, and that comes as a red flag to me as a serious medical injury. And the LEAs are supposed to report that to me within 2 school days.
What if there was an injury, but it's not reported on the form?
I wouldn't see it.
Okay.
My battery is low and I don't have my advice. I don't have my charger here. Darn. And any further questions? So it's pretty comprehensive, this risk system. And like I said before, one of the things that we do look at, and is one of the reports that goes out to the Secretary of Education, is part about injuries. Who's been injured, and it's staff or student or both. It's pretty, like I said, it's a 23-page document, 20 to 23-page document that goes. So I rambled on a lot. I know, I apologize, but anything further? Oh, and then the other thing I have is the Padlet there. Just basically has the different documents that you can look at too, if you want to.